Hi, welcome to Bot Brack. I'm Edward Box on the Box Rock and Celluloid. So I'm going to talk about my second name today, the Box TV. Going to talk about Ham House of Horror. So when I was a little kid, it was nine and a half when this came out. Is the days when I was first allowed to watch horror films, and the early horror films I watched were actually black and white ones, the old Val Guest and things like that on BBC One. I still remember The Beast with Five Fingers, probably the Curse of the Cat People or Catwoman or something like that. Maybe the early Wolfman films, and then I sort of progressed to Hammer after that. But I think the Hammer House of Horror probably came in somewhere in that gap. So what's the history of this show? Basically, Hammer's hugely successful from the late 50s, once they started doing Frankenstein Dracula. I think it won an award for British industry. And that pretty much carries on through the early part of the 60s into the mid-60s. Dracula Prince of Darkness, Devil Rides Out, sort of some classics at the end, coming in the second part of the 60s. But then they kind of struggle. Once Rosemary's Baby comes out in 68, they start to look tame. And by 73, 74, you've had The Exorcist and various other horror films, The Omen in 76, and Hammer try and copy these. There's a film called To the Devil, the Daughter, for instance, which is probably one part The Exorcist influence and, a bit of The Omen maybe, although I'm not sure exactly when that came out in 76, but they also produced the On the Buses film. So for people who aren't aware, there was a TV show called On the Buses on British television from 69 to 74, and typically what we did with situation comedies is we made feature-length films and they were released to the pictures, and these did very well. And the On the Buses films, the first one, On the Buses, was the number one box office hit in Britain in 1971. Believe me, that is the truth. On the Buses were like a kind of poor relation to Carry On films, although I've got a soft spot for Holiday on the Buses, the third one. Okay, so that's Hammer. Kept Hammer still successful. I think they might have done some of the Confessions of, which were like sex comedies, but they weren't making films after 76, I believe. To the Devil, the Daughter was the last one. So this was a way of the TV show was a way of using a Hammer brand that was still well known. And using some of the Bray Studios, using some of the locations. There's a classic kind of white Hammer house at Bray is used in this, and using some of the directors who had directed Hammer films, and it's Peter Sazdy, sorry. I forget which Hammer films he directed, but he was a kind of second level director. So this had 13 episodes, so it was a typical format for British television at that time. Some shows, in American TV at that time would run 24, 26 episodes. Britain generally, you got things like Doctor Who, which would run for 26 weeks. But most series, whether it's Blake 7 Professionals, The Sweeney, they would do 13 episodes. So it's basically a quarter of the year exactly. So basically the format of Hammer House of Horror is you have a different story each week. It would contain different guest stars. They'd all be individual stories. How would I describe them? There's elements, there's a sting in the tail, so there's a little bit of the Twilight Zone, I suppose, in that respect. The protagonist thinks it's going to go one way and it doesn't. There's also like a shade of Tales of the Unexpected, if you know the Roald Dahl series, which just predates this a bit. But there's a horror element. This was after the Watershed. It was definitely on after 9 o'clock at night, and maybe 10. I'd have to check the TV guides. So on a Friday night, when I think it was on a Saturday, it was a treat, especially for someone young like me. It was scary enough for me. If you're watching it now, you'd probably be like, what the fuck is this? And critical opinion of it's quite low. I really love it. It had a great credit sequence. Hammer House of Horror in red writing. And then you have the graveyard, and there's a spooky vicar at the window, which is all good. So in actual fact, when you get the DVD box set, the episodes are in a different order. They're probably in the order that they were originally supposed to be released in, but maybe the producers, the TV companies, decided to change it. So that's when I got the box set. I was confused because the first episode of the box set wasn't the first episode I remember seeing, and it was quite correct. The first episode was shown was Witching Time. So Witching Time mainly interesting. It's got a witch in it. It was okay. It's not the best Hammer House of Horror. It's written by Anthony Reid. He did some Doctor Who stuff. 13th of September 1980 was its first shown. Probably interesting thing about this, it stars John Finch. So John Finch was in Hitchcock's Frenzy and Polanski's Macbeth. And then he's in that crazy, Jerry Cornelius film as well, sci-fi. Death on the Nile as well, I think. So John Finch, he was a British actor, could have been a bigger star, I think, but didn't fancy it. And then by this point, he's kind of, he's going into TV. I like him as an actor. He's quite edgy. Maybe could have been James Bond, but he had something. I suspect. Friends he did pretty well. He's in some quite high profile stuff. I suspect maybe he just didn't want it. He's also in. I can't remember what else. He actually turns up in a folk horror film, a Welsh folk horror film. Back end, saw him in the early noughties, and that was his last film. And he died about 70. He was quite, not old. Not young, but not old. So this isn't a bad one. It was a reasonable start. Running time is 54 minutes on these, so it was just set, for TV. The next one's the 13th Reunion. There's not really anyone that well known. You've got Warren Clark in the supporting part. You'll know him as Dim from Clockwork Orange, and there's James Cosmo, great Scottish actor, lovely man, Braveheart and so on. There's a main actress is a girl called Julia Foster, but I don't remember her much. This is basically, she's an investigative reporter, and some people have crashed in the Andes or something. It's probably based on a live, and it's like they get together for a reunion every year since the crash, all the survivors, and then it's like, how have they survived? Well, they're cannibals. So the twist in the tale is she ends up at dinner. So this is a typical thing. What she says, the Witching Time one. I forget what the kind of twist is. There isn't really a twist at the end of this, and I think that's why the producers have put that first, because the Witching Time episode, they kind of defeat the witch and that's it. But the other ones, there's always a sting in the tail, and this is what happens to the Julia Foster character in the 13th Reunion. So this was 20th of September 1980. So there's one every week. Next, you got Rude Awakening. This was the first really one that kind of stuck in me, got under my skin a bit more, because he's a young lad at the start. His dad's experimenting on rabbits and plants. He's trying to develop some kind of sustainable plant or crop for third world countries. He's a workaholic, and his son is a bit disturbed, and he goes in to his lab and eats the poison that he gives the rabbits. And the upshot is they adopt another child who's a bit strange, and he gets haunted by the ghost of the dead son. It's Gary Bond's in it. Now Gary Bond is in Wake in Fright, which is a really good Ted Kotcheff film from 1971. And Barbara Kellerman. Now I forget, Barbara Kellerman might be in the Sea Devils. Pretty good. And I've just made a mistake. I've said this, and this was actually the fourth one. So I'll go through this one. I'll go back to the third one. Apologies. This has got the typical sting in the scale. Basically, the spooky kid, the ghost, basically kills the dad, and it's quite good. I quite enjoy it. And then the third episode, which is one I should have said, which was 27th of September. This is directed by Peter Sasti, so Pama regular. This is Rude Awakening. Denholm Elliott. He's a lecturer, estate agent, and has recurring dreams about his very nice secretary. So, each dream feels really real to him. And then he basically gets more nightmarish, and then the sting in the tail is he gets up in the morning thinking he's in a dream. He strangles his wife because he's sick of her, and he kind of goes about his business, thinking that he's dreaming, but he's not. He's actually in reality. And that's the kind of sting in the tail. On that one, number 5 was The House That Bled to Death. So this starred Nicholas Ball. Nicholas Ball was well known in British TV for a show called Hazel. And what was interesting about Hazel, it was a kind of down at heel private eye, but it was written by Terry Venables, who's a famous football manager of Tottenham, England. and footballer. But anyway, this is, so it's got Brian Croucher in it as well, who's the second Travis in Blake 7. They buy a house for a good price, but it's got a history. There's been a murder there, and there's various terrifying events, and they're forced to flee the house. But the sting of the tale is that they have put, created these theatrical moments themselves to create a story about the house, to get money and sell the story. However, it's traumatised the little daughter, and at the end she hacks up Nicholas Bull with an axe. I've maybe put a plot spoiler thing at the start of this. But again, it's pretty good twist on that. And then to number 6, I think this one's really good. This is if I had to pick one of the great Hammer House of Horrors, I think this is one everyone remembers. This is Charlie Boy. So it's a good cast on this, particularly Leigh Lawson. So Leigh Lawson's the husband of Twiggy, popular actor in the 70s. He also did a TV show called Travelling Man, where he lived on a canal barge. He was an ex-cop, I think, and he kind of solved cases. I don't know what happened to that show. I always liked it in the mid-80s. But anyways, it was from October 1980, October 18th. So basically, Leigh Lawson's a kind of antiques dealer, I think, or he likes going thrift shopping, and he gets like an ancient African voodoo doll. And then basically it's called Charlie Boy. His girlfriend nicknames it Charlie Boy, and everyone who comes in contact with it dies a death. So it's kind of like The Omen in that respect. Anyone who comes out or comes in contact with Damien or threatens Damien. So there's some pretty good deaths in this. A guy is going fox hunting or something. He jumps over a fence and topples and gets impaled on some farm machine, which is good. Another guy gets shot with a crossbow. There's a nasty car accident with the actress. I forget her name now, but she was in the British TV show Angels. And there's twist in the tail as at the end, Leigh Lawson tries to destroy Charlie Boy, but he falls over and Charlie Boy's got nails him and he impales Leigh Lawson, and then there's a fire in the basement, he burns to death. It's good. I always liked it. It's one, when I first spoke about this with mates, it's one they all remember. The next one I couldn't remember from the time. And when I watched it again, it's really good. When you go back and watch something. I should just say the first time I re-watched these, were never on TV, so I probably watched them twice when they repeated. And then back end of very early, it was about 2000 when it was on video, and I got the video and I pretty much binged it. The VHS. It wasn't even on DVD then. And this was one when I watched it again, I remembered it, but I couldn't remember it in my head until it triggered it. So this is interesting. It's got Peter Cushing in it, yes, and it's got a pre-Hannibal Lecter, Brian Cox pre-Succession, so this is probably like one of the early things Brian Cox was in, where he probably got like a big mainstream leading role. Basically, Peter Cushing plays an elderly pet shop owner, but he's actually a former Nazi concentration camp guard. That's the twist, is, Brian Cox's character thinks the guy was, in the death camps. He was, but he was one of the guards. I was one of the guards. And he experiments on animals, trapping them, seeing how they behave, and he wants to get a human victim, and he traps Brian Cox. And then the sting in the tail is Peter Cushing gets trapped at the end. I should say that Brian Cox's girlfriend has also got trapped with Brian Cox. I can't remember whether that happened straight away or later. They live in a house in the middle of fucking nowhere, but it's near a motorway. It's a bit miserable. If anyone's driven near Manchester, there's that farmhouse in the middle of the M62. It's a bit like that. Anyway, so Brian Cox, he gets trapped at the end. They manage to break out. They trap Peter Cushing. You think that's a sting in the tail, but then they go home and Peter Cushing's rigged the house and they're trapped in the house. And it's called Silent Scream because he's shouting out the window, but no one can hear him because he lives by a bloody main road in a shitty farmhouse. But it's a good one, and obviously it's got Cushing in it, who's he's a Hammer icon, isn't he? Then we've got Children of the Full Moon, and this is another belter. This Charlie Boy's Silent Scream, which I've forgotten about, but Children of the Full Moon's brilliant. This is Christopher Cazenove, died young actually, an actor I always enjoyed. I think he was in the Colbys, a Dynasty. Celia Gregory, who's very nice. Diana Dawes is in this, fantastic. Oh, so what happens is, sorry, my love, sorry. So basically, Casanove's driving on his girlfriend. They crash the car, and they go up to a house to get help. and Krista Kavanagh, there's a weird beast there. He falls out the window, unconscious, and they kind of I forget they wake up in hospital and it's like it hasn't happened. But he's sure that they've been to this house. And anyway, when they go to the house, there's like weird kids. It's all very folk horror. All the kids have got weird names, and there's about 20 of them. And you don't know where the farmer is, the woodsman. But anyway, turns out that his wife's actually been attacked by a werewolf. She's been impregnated. She goes back to the farmhouse to give birth. And Casanova goes there and he gets killed by the woodsman who turns into a werewolf, which is really scary. It was pretty good werewolf makeup at the time. Really good. I really like it, you know. For Friday, Saturday night, generally scary when you're a kid. Then you got Carpathian Eagle. This is interesting. In an early role, it features Pierce Brosnan. I think this is one of his first roles, but it's just a little supporting part. He's just a guy running or something. But you got Suzanne Danielle in this. So Suzanne Danielle was like a kind of sex symbol kind of actress. I know that sounds terrible. In the late 70s, I think she's in Carry On Emmanuel, or is she in Carry On England? I think Carry On Emmanuel, which is like the kind of sex nudist Carry On film. So she's in this. She plays a novelist. Anthony Valentine's in it. Now, heavy metal fans will know that Anthony Valentine's also the voice of Dr. X on the Queensryche Operation Mindcrime album, but I think he's, I think he was in Colditch, he was in Callan as well. A good actor. Basically, he's a cop on the case. The Carpathian Eagle is kind of stabbing victims ritualistically with a knife. Twist of the tale is he cops off with Suzanne Danielle. Who can blame him? And basically, yeah, she's the Carpathian Eagle. She's doing research for a book and she blats him at the end. So that's the twist. Then you've got Guardians of the Abyss. So this has got Ray Lonnan in it. So Ray Lonnan was in a show called Harry's Game, which had a really cool film by Clannad and was like a Belfast Troubles thriller. He was playing an undercover cop, sort of Vice Squad, well, Scotland Yard, I can't remember. Anyway, he's good. And you've got Rosalind Landor in it, who was in quite a few things. And then you've got the mighty Paul Darrow. So he's guy, he goes to an antiques dealer, Ray Lonnan, he picks up this mirror, and it's John Dee's mirror. I don't know who John Dee is, but he's some kind of cult leader or something. Basically, yeah, it's all about Satanism. It's all kind of very Aleister Crowley. There's a guy, I think it's John Carson, he plays the Aleister Crowley type figure. I think John Carson, you'll know him from the Hammer, Plague of the Zombies, I think. And Paul Darrow's like his minion, Master. You know, Paul Darrow's got that fantastic voice. So yeah, the twist of the tale, like Ray Lonnan comes back as Satan or something. It's quite good. What's interesting about this is kind of filmed around the home counties. So obviously the Hammer Studios, you know, it's in the countryside outside London. I guess it's Surrey or those areas, Berkshire. I'm not sure. So it's you know, it's quite interesting for that. It's kind of England's green and pleasant land. Then you got Visitor from the Grave. This is quite a good one. It's got an American actress in this called Catherine Lee Scott. I guess that was the American argument. You got Blake from Blake 7, Gareth Thomas, and one of my favourite TV actors, Manimal himself, Simon McCorkindale. Always loved McCorkindale. Died too young, great in Casualty. And I think is he in Death on the Nile? I think he is. He is in Death on the Nile as well. The 1978 one, Riddle of the Sands. Yeah, he's good. He was in some other cop thing. American, married to Susan George. So this is, she kills an intruder in the house, and then a boyfriend buries the character, the victim in the woods, but then the victim comes back to haunt her. But basically they're sending her out of the mind, you know. It's him, it's Blake. You betray us, Blake. Gareth Thomas, they're like, you know, they're doing it's like the house that bled to death in that respect. They're performing these kind of spooks and apparitions to send her out of the mind because she's wealthy and so they can get the money. But the twist is at the end she comes back from beyond the grave for real and burns the money up. Then you've got the Two Faces of Evil. This is a good one. You've got an actor called Gary Raymond. Quite an interesting sort of looking actor, interesting facial features. And basically the plot of this, they're off on holiday, they crash the car, they pick up a sinister hitchhiker, The family is the son, the mum, and the dad. The car crashes, and the sinister hitchhiker looks like the dad, but like an evil doppelganger of the dad, and they end up in a hospital, and it kind of plays out from there. And then it's usually got the usual sting in the tail on the wife at the end. With the doppelganger husband is now the husband, and they've got a doppelganger kid with his hideous teeth as well. This is pretty good. And yeah, finish on a bit of a drab, weird, yeah. It kind of starts not as great, Hammer House of Horror, and kind of finishes not as great. The Mark of Satan. So interesting. This is Peter McInnery. So he played Entertaining Mr. Sloan, I think. He's quite a well-known actor at the time, but he's still around, but you just don't see him in much now. There's an actress called Georgina Hale as well, who's been in quite a lot of stuff. She's in The Devils and The Boyfriend, some Ken Russell stuff. So, basically the character, Peter McInnery's a hospital porter, and he thinks the devil's chosen him as evil's chosen him as the devil's disciple. And he's basically going mad. I forget what happened in this. I think he ends up killing people and he shouldn't, or he ends up trying to cut some out himself. It's not great. This is more psychological horror, but it just doesn't do it very well. But anyway, yeah, I mean that was it. It was created by Roy Skeggs. Yeah, I mean really, Peter Sasdy's the only kind of main director. You got Tom Clegg, who did the Sweeney and Sweeney 2, who directed some episodes. Francis Meghany, who I recognise. Don Sharp, actually. Don Sharp, Australian-born British woman. He did quite a lot of the stuff. So yeah, I it's worth checking out this show. Sometimes it's on the Horror Channel. You can get it on DVD. It's probably on. Yeah, does anyone buy DVD now? It is very dated. The other thing that's interesting about it, shows you the England at the time. Particularly the House That Bled to Death episode, they're on kind of in council social housing pre the Thatcher sell-off. And what's interesting is you've got the kind of Pebble Dash and around those areas and around rural and urban areas. England's quite unkept at times. There's a lot of grass growing up off the pavements, and we sort of forget that, like, after the war for a long time, even into the 70s and very early 80s, things weren't always as well kept. England wasn't very shiny, when I go out now, we've got, in inner cities, you get a lot of development and towns, you get, things spruced up and, quite a lot of cleaning and things like that. But that's one of the things, I find out when I watch episodes of Professionals as well, and it's interesting, and seeing like the penchant for kind of rose bushes and, the sort of what I call old lady gardens. It's a different England, and it captures that. It's 1980, but really it's still like the 70s, and people are still dressing in kind of 70s gear. The jeans aren't quite as flared, but it hasn't. The 80s hasn't arrived yet. It will take to 83, 84 for that to happen probably. Okay, so that's my little Hammer House of horror. Sorry there's no clips, it's just me talking about it. Check it out. And I'll see you again soon. Remember to share and subscribe. If you're interested in rock album, heavy metal album reviews, head over to my Box Guitar Tuition channel, and I do have reviews over there. Thanks very much. Cheers.